Okay, welcome to the Creative Masterclass at Digital Hollywood 2019 Springtime. So, how many of you have already been to this panel before? Okay, so we are going to have conversations, and at the very end, we're going to have some room for questions. Try to think now, if you get to ask some of these people one question, what is the most burning topic on your minds, so that you make the moment matter? So let me introduce you to our guests. Starting down at the far end, we have Andrew Sugarman. Andrew produces and finances films through his company, Pantheon Entertainment. He has done some amazing films, some of which were my favorites ever, like Shop Girl. He has a cross-section of genres that he works in, and this is just a tiny sampling. All of these people on this panel have way more credits, so consider this the appetizer that sends you looking at much more of their work online. Adam Leipzig is reinventing education through his startup, Media U. He's been an executive at Disney and president of National Geographic Films, where he brought March of the Penguins into all of our hearts. He's got 2 books he's written. He is the publisher and editor-in-chief of Cultural Weekly, which I occasionally write for. And his TEDx talk is just amazing. Hunt it down. Jordan Berg is a packaging and digital agent at CAA. He represents clients like Catherine Hardwicke in the digital space and has packaged some of the films that have come out of the in-house production arm of CAA. Tim Zajaros is also producing and financing films through his company, Armory Films. He has done Mudbound. His new project coming out this summer is The Peanut Butter Falcon, which we'll be talking about. He has done interesting projects that are both for online streamers and for major studios. And then there's Todd Garner. Todd Garner produces about 50 movies a year with some unknown talent like Adam Sandler, he's done Paul Blart Mall Cop, Night and Day. One of the most interesting films that I saw was called Tag, which, as the mother of 3 now grown sons, I can assure you is a documentary. And most of all, Todd has a phenomenal podcast called The Producer's Guide. And he has done over 60 episodes so far. Once you start, preferably with the first one, which is Adam Sandler, you're going to get hooked, and you're going to find you don't know anything about what goes on in Hollywood. So get ready to get absorbed. I have had Todd in the car with me at Trader Joe's. He is with me in the morning when I wake up, and sometimes in the evening as I'm going to sleep. It is yes, well, it's Hollywood. Come on, just go with it. And he produces films through his company, Broken Road, and you'll definitely want to know more about his stuff. And last but hopefully not least, there is me. I started out writing TV shows, which interestingly enough are still very big in the Christian community, which I only know because I speak at the National Religious Broadcasters Conference every year, and everybody comes up and tells me they were just watching Love Boat last week. After I had children and needed a placeholder job, I was associate publisher of Creative Screenwriting Magazine and did the first 5 years of Screenwriting Expo. Along the way, I decided that I would dabble in technology and got 3 patents for developing a mobile platform called Clixit. And my most recent credit is working for Stan Lee's POW Entertainment, doing my first comic book. So, thank you. So here we are. And I want to start with Adam because instead of just going down the line and talking about projects, I thought we'd begin talking about the idea of what does the idea of creativity mean right now in America and in the world?
Thanks for tossing me a softball. How many creatives do we have in the house? That's just about everybody. Okay, let me give you a really specific answer to a general question. I think creativity today is 3 things. I think it's entrepreneurship and uniqueness and the ability to execute. Entrepreneurship because every creative person has to be the CEO of their own company. You're your own producer, your own publicist, your own chief executive, your own CFO, your own CTO, your own CIO. No one's going to do it except you, and you need to figure out how to do that and be that. Uniqueness because we don't want to see another one of those movies or those shows. You have to make something that nobody has seen before. Make the thing that you haven't seen before. That's what you should be making. And then ability to execute, because I don't know how other people on the panel feel, but there are so many great first acts, and so many of them fizzle and never have great third acts. And there are so many people with great ideas that just can't get them all the way across the finish line. So I think today in America, creativity has a very practical framework that you have to be able to actually get it done, and done well enough that you can bring other people along to help you achieve your vision. Toss it to the rest of you.
Andrew.
We're answering the same question, what is creativity?
Yeah.
I think creativity is unique for each person and how they express their creativity and what drives a person in this industry to be creative. I mean, there's a lot, and I think creativity is short-sold for a lot of the people who are not obvious the creative as a writer or a director. There are people who are in finance who are incredibly creative because they have to think outside the box and come up with different ways to solve problems. So for me, creativity, a lot of it has to do with solving problems, solving issues, and figuring things out in a way that's unique. So yes, there's the expression of a unique voice, and a writer has a unique voice, and a director has a vision. All of those are creative. But ultimately what I think creative comes down to is looking at a problem, and that problem can be how to resolve the third act of a script. The problem can be how are we going to do the visual effects on this particular movie and yet stay within budget. The problem could be how am I going to get this picture financed? All of those things are creative problems that need solutions, and it takes the brilliance and the creativity and the uniqueness of how you attack that problem to make your success. And I think that's where the creativity comes on all the different levels and on all the different aspects of what make filmmaking.
Jordan, you're in the area that's cutting edge of creativity. What does it mean to you and to your whole team back at CAA?
I think the number one thing that I've always learned, and I see it resonate throughout our company and throughout a lot of our clients, is that people can tell you that there's a certain path that you should take or a certain direction that makes the most sense, but at the end of the day, there's no right way to do one thing, honestly. There is a million different ways to do it, and you can look at it across every variation within the industry from, a writer, director, performer, agent, manager, producer, whomever you may be. No one had the same path coming up. Everyone has a different, work style and work ethic. What works for one person is the complete opposite for another person. So you really have to hone in and really listen to what you feel is your strongest passion area and your strongest areas of focus moving forward, and in addition to hearing people around you and echoing the same sentiment, hopefully. And once you hear about that, then ultimately things will go in a certain direction for you. I look at a good example is we look at Jason Blum is obviously a prolific producer. He had a number of movies that he had produced in the family-friendly space before Paranormal hit, and then once that hit, obviously he took it in a direction no one's doing, these tiny pennies worth of low budget horror movies, and that's a white space for me to really lean into. And he obviously leaned into that and put full steam ahead and had this business plan. He's obviously creative genius and built a company around it, but he went into this identifiable brand that he was also a passion area of his behind. And then ultimately, once he really hit on that and one after the next, then he kind of started to break it out into other areas. Not to say again, this has to be, because so many people up here have so much experience, in other areas, but it's something to kind of look at closely and see that this is one area that worked for somebody. In other areas, it's multiple movies that hit it one after the next. But brand definition when you're just starting out, I think, is very, very crucial, and say what you can really, really do really well and identifiable compared to a lot of the other people, and run with that, and then it can open up so many other areas outside of that, what you ultimately may want to do too.
So Tim and Todd, what do you think makes a person creative on the production end where you start? And how do you spot somebody who's able to replicate it over and over?
No, you go first. That way I can disagree with you.
First, confidence. for me is really important, somebody that actually has a distinct and unique vision, but is actually confident in what, in that vision. Because I feel like you meet with a lot of writers and directors, and people that want to make something, but are more focused on making something that, when you're meeting with them, that they're trying to basically pitch you what you want to hear as opposed to what the story that they want to tell. And I think that when they do that, obviously that there's nothing necessarily unique to what they're pitching you. They're trying to assume what you're looking for and what you want, and that's not really a vision. That is an interpretation of my vision, not necessarily their vision. Now, it's important, I think, to be collaborative, because not everybody's right all the time, and you need to be flexible and when you're making films 100%. But yeah, I mean, I think confidence, a unique vision, and passion.
Yeah. I would agree with all that. I do think that you have to come at things with a clear point of view, but also in the execution of it, just not want to just be good, and it's good enough, and that applies all through the storytelling process. So if you're driving in your car and you come up with a good idea, or you hear a good idea or whatever, don't just rush out to try and get it done right away. Really think about it and think about, like, what is this movie or television show or whatever, and what is special about it, and why is it going to resonate with the audience? Because ultimately you have to make it. And I think that a lot of young producers and storytellers just get stuck on just selling something or just getting something set up. And if you've been doing it as long as I have, certainly, or we have, that becomes like incidental. You really have to have a long-term vision of this is going to come out in a theater or for a streamer or whatever. And so you can't just be good enough. You can't just like sell the idea to the first person who wants to buy it necessarily. You have to pick the right writer. You really have to concentrate when you're developing something that it's not just, well, it's good enough now, let me try to go get it made. Because at some point you're going to hit that, wall head on where it's not good enough. It's either going to be, you won't get a great piece of talent attached to it, such as a director or an actor. You won't get a studio to say yes, or ultimately the audience will just be like, it doesn't seem good, which is always so shocking to me, how fast an audience can pick up on if some, you think like, I think I did a pretty good job of hiding this, that it's not great. And the second, a trailer hits, you're like, that looks like shit. And you're like, oh, okay, I didn't hide it so well. That was a good 4 years of my life. So I would say it's the tenacity to just make sure that at every step you do the best you possibly can.
So how long do you think, on average, or if you can even estimate, how long is that incubation process for you?
Well, I just had the good fortune of making a movie that took 14 years to make. That was a good incubator.
How was the trailer received?
Not yet. I just finished shooting. So, I mean, look, there is no. I think that's the quickest way to make yourself insane, is to have like some expectation of like, this should probably take 6 months, or any expectation whatsoever, because you'll just quit. I mean, it's absurd how hard it is to get movies made. Yet, the people that I am friends with, and certainly the people that I have on my podcast, are all wildly successful, more successful than they've ever been in their lives as producers. One of my dear friends, Basil Iwanek, just had a movie come out this weekend, did $57 million. This is a guy who's been doing this a long time, and he's had a lot of success along the way, but this was like...
Do you want to mention the movie?
It's called John Wick 3. Okay. And so he's his third one in his series. The guy's been working his ass off. I mean, he's just a grinder. And he had a shit series of luck this year. He had 3 movies at Weinstein Company when the whole thing went upside down. And so, it's just about tenacity and staying with it, because it just takes one. And so, if you go in thinking a finite amount of time that this should get done, you're going to definitely be disappointed.
Yeah. Also, recently I've been making a lot of documentaries. Average for documentary is 5 years, just to put it in perspective. So if you get to 4 years and you're not done yet, don't worry, you're still in process.
So I want to start with Tim and Andrew on this one. How do you decide, because you guys do financing, how do you decide whether or not a movie merits you going to the absolute limits to fund this project? What are your criteria?
Well, first and foremost, it's the script. I mean, we don't get tempted by a big director or a big writer or a big cast, and sometimes we're on way before there's the cast or directors, but I think that there's a lot of companies that get seduced by names and they don't really pay attention to the material. And the material, like, you can have the greatest actors and the greatest director in the world, but if the script's a piece of crap, the movie's gonna be a piece of crap. So for us, it's first and foremost, it's the story, and if it hits us, or just almost every movie that we've made, we've read the script and we're like, we gotta make this, or we need to go give a couple notes, and if they can execute these notes, then we need to go make this movie. It's more of a feeling than it is anything else. And then, of course, you need to have a certain level of cast to at least so you can get a certain level of foreign sales. The foreign sales market isn't even barely existent now. But that said, we also take much larger risks than other companies, because I think that so many companies are focused on those numbers and an algorithm that's going to tell you whether or not a movie's going to work, and that's just not how you do it, in my opinion. You can't just put this actor and this level of action and it's just going to work, and I don't know. To me, that doesn't work, and I think that it's pretty clear across the board that doesn't work, but there's still a lot of companies and studios, for that matter, that follow that sort of plan, and I don't know, it's just not something that we do. So first is the story, the script.
Andrew?
Okay, yeah, we actually have financing partners that I work with, so we don't self-finance, but I go to several partners for financing for films, and which actually puts a whole level of responsibility on it, because you're actually dealing with other people's money. For me, in this answer is a myriad of different questions, not just in relation to financing, but in relation to why I'm doing this, and what motivates me is that I have to be extremely passionate about a project. I have to feel that a particular movie isn't just a deal, but this is a movie that's got to get made. That I have a very, very strong feeling this is a movie I have to make, and that I would watch it as an audience, and that I think other people, therefore, are going to watch it as an audience. When I made Conviction, that was a movie, when I read the script, I dropped everything that I had. Some very big stuff happening. I just dropped everything and said, I'm dropping all these things, I'm making this movie. And a bunch of people thought I was crazy. And there had been some very, very experienced good people who had failed at getting that picture made. And so I was up against a big barrier of, like, how are you going to get that thing done? Like, some very big boys, like at Working Title, weren't able to get it done. I just started doing it. And it was that kind of certainty and passion and knowing that I had to make this film that drove me, that brought in the investors, that coalesced the creative community that made that happen. And, it's the film that I'm the most proud of anything I've ever done. So that's what drives me.
So this is for all of you, and I mentioned that I speak to the evangelical Christians, which is fascinating because I'm an outsider to that community in many ways. But there's 140 million people who identify as Christian in this country, and they're still watching the TV shows because they want safe and clean content. So the question is it possible, outside of Disney, to make a blockbuster that doesn't have sex, violence, and profanity in it in this current market in the 21st century? If so, how? If not, why?
Well, yeah, I mean, look at Illumination. I mean, there's the problem with the family film market right now, having come from Disney, as has Adam, is that a lot of it has been ceded to animation. So this movie that we just did with John Cena and John Leguizamo and Keegan-Michael Key and Judy Greer is called Playing with Fire. It's very much a throwback to the movies I was making when I was at Disney, which are like The Pacifier, Game Plan, those kind of movies. And for whatever reason, the probably just a generational thing, and they just weren't sexy enough. You know, all the studios decided, nah, we're not making those anymore. So when I started my deal at Paramount Pictures, they recognize there's still a market for that. I mean, it's yet to be seen. I have no idea how the movie will do. But everywhere I go now, Netflix, Universal, Sony, they all want family movies because they're recognizing that. It's not just the Christians, by the way. It's anybody who has kids. If you have kids and you go, well, what is there to see this weekend? If it's not a Marvel movie or animation, there's nothing to see. And the live action, it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy if you give that up to animation. By the way, they've done it incredibly well. If there is a market there, potentially, and so I think that you're going to start to see those kind of traditional family movies being made. Ironically, Disney they don't make them anymore. They're going to start making more for, you know, the streaming service, Disney Plus, but the studio has zero interest in making those movies. And what's weird is that when we did our P&L for the movie, they couldn't find a movie that didn't gross less than $100 million worldwide in all those, you know, stupid guy runs into kids movies. And so that's the problem is if you just decide, it's not sexy enough, I'd rather make The Big Sick, you know, or something like that, which is a little bit more cachet and you can go to cocktail parties and be cool. Those movies won't get made. I am starting to see that shift.
Every time I walk onto the lot at Disney, I wish that I was wearing a T-shirt that said "No more dead mommies." Is that something?
Hear, hear.
Thank you. Is that something that we can ever break?
That's the craziest question ever. I'll take it.
There you go.
I'll take it.
I don't have any.
The reason why you kill the mother, is that you have to isolate the male with the kids. Like the reason why all these movies work, if you look at Incredible, she's not dead, but she goes off and saves the world. They figured it out. So
As
if you
one
look
does.
if you look at all of these movies, the perception in comedy is that men are idiots. And so you put them with kids and like, what do we do? You know, and so that is the formula if you look at Despicable Me and something like, so those kind of movies, you're always trying to isolate the father. In the old animated movies, that's the way they isolated him. I think that's going by the wayside now.
I was going to turn that question over to the House and assume that there's someone in the House who's going to stop killing mommies. Yes, I see hands going up
Yeah, you
right
don't
now.
need to
It's
anymore.
happening.
You don't
It's
need
happening.
So, Jordan, YouTube and all of the other platforms are really insisting on safer content now because of the advertising. So how is that influencing the creative process for the Young Turks, who seem to be the large pool of talent there?
I mean, I think, you know, just going back to the point of more family-friendly and safer content just in general, I mean, I think it's reflective, unfortunately, across the world and all the messaging that we're getting, and people are wanting, clearly, you know, more happier times. And so Netflix has identified that really well in a brand, in a very, you know, key area of focus of doing, you know, 10 to 15 of these movies potentially a year, of these, you know, just uplifting and inspiring movies, and that can resonate. Clearly, it's going across all the other verticals and all the other channels, so like Facebook, you know, YouTube and so forth, you know, where advertisers get spooked, and it's not easy to get advertiser money wherever you are, this day and age especially. So you start to see some more streamers that are going to be popping up that have already made announcements too, that are going to try to attack the advertisers more so. For them to do that, clearly they need to have safer content, because, you know, for one thing that spooks them, they'll immediately pull off and they won't, you know, put their brand behind and fund the piece of a series or a feature. So, I mean, there's a lot of, you know, creators that are coming off of, I mean, you can spit, like Joe Penna, you know, is a guy who came out of the YouTube space as a director, did this movie called Arctic that played at Cannes last year. You know, he was always like a filmmaker in his own right and always wanted to do bigger movies, but, you know, they took a chance on him, and he hadn't done, you know, one just yet, but he did a ton of short films off of it they were edgy enough for his own YouTube channel, but, you know, then in the next area of pivoting towards that, had this movie called Arctic, and, you know, he and his writing partner wrote the script and attached to direct. They put the whole movie together, went to Cannes, and so forth. So, you know, people that, you know, can can come out of a unique perspective and unique world that, especially this day and age where, you know, more safe content is just enticing to everybody around the world, will have a clear kind of, you know, market for that, I feel like. And, you know, whereas everyone was wanting dark stuff for a number of years, and still a lot of people do, all the streamers especially want to go a little more lighter fare, or at least want to have a clear, you know, clear area of focus within that, and it'll continue to just ramp up, I feel like, even more and more as you go down the lane. So.
I want to reframe the word calling this safe content. I think it's hard content. And I don't mean hard R, and I have no problem with hard R, but what I mean is I think that most of the time when I read scripts and see movies, the default to language, to sex and violence is easy writing. It's an easy way out of a character or a moment. And I think it's much harder to write great dialogue, great characters, great stories that don't have to have that easy default. So I just, you know, safe sounds like baby food. I don't want it. But interesting, character-driven, meaty human stories or animal stories. By the way, March of the Penguins, a good quarter of the box office was the Christian community, because so I think there's a lot of content out there that hasn't yet been explored.
So this one is for Tim and Todd, because you've both made movies that are for Netflix and you've both made movies for studios. So can you compare and contrast the process all the way up to when it comes out?
Well, when it comes out is a joy because you have no box office, so you can just relax. Because there's nothing more gut-wrenching than a weekend of tracking and knowing how awful your movie's going to do. When it goes, thank you. when it goes to Netflix, you're like, this is great. Millions of people are watching it right now in your own head. Anyway, so the difference is it's negligible in terms of the making of it. I've made 3 at Netflix, and Isn't It Romantic was bought by Netflix for the whole world except for North America after the fact, which was fascinating. And so the making of it, you know, when I first made True Memoirs there, it wasn't, they were very clear that it was not a movie studio. It was a service. They were not going to give us notes. They weren't going to act like a studio. They were just going to let us do our thing, and then proceeded to do the exact opposite. They absolutely were a movie studio. They gave us tons of notes. They were very involved. Great people working there. And then they just decided, you know what, I think we are a studio if we're going to make 90 movies a year. And so they hired Scott Stuber, and then they've hired many, many executives from around town, and they are a full-fledged studio. So, and they act like it. And so when you're there, you know, they're very confident. They know exactly what they want. They are completely untethered from the P&L, which is why they're going to win and why movie studios are ultimately going to slowly bleed to death. And by untethering from the P&L, it frees them up to make decisions that are purely creative rather than driven by some insane, you know, foreign sales or some crazy notion that, you know, this actress is going to get on a couple of covers, which is going to mean a few dollars in the box office, which is bullshit.
Mm-hmm. Definitely agree with that. Well, actually, we finance and produce our movies independently, then we sell them. So technically, we've never actually worked with a studio or Netflix prior to the sale. I mean, I could speak only to the difference in the release strategy, potentially, and it was just, we only had one movie with Netflix, and it was just a unique situation when they purchased Mudbound out of Sundance. One of the reasons why we went with them is because they were extremely passionate about the movie, and we put an awards campaign in the contract. So that was one of the biggest reasons why we went with them. And you know, when they're really behind something, when they really believe in something, I mean, they really put their money where their mouth is. And man, they spent an exceptional amount of money getting Mudbound out there. And we knew that going into that, we knew that even though we're getting into an awards campaign with Netflix, which was likely going to be the reason why we might not even get a Best Picture nomination because it was Netflix, we still made the movie because we wanted the world to see the movie, and we knew that if they put the money into the marketing of that movie and had the platform in which more viewers could see the movie, and then that's really why we made the movie in the first place.
Well, that can't be overstated. If you think about Netflix, if you've ever driven down the Sunset Corridor going either east or west, it's all Netflix billboards, and so they feel ubiquitous. They feel like, oh my God, Netflix is everywhere. That's all they're spending their marketing money on. That's what's incredible about this company, is that it's just peer-to-peer marketing. All their marketing is done within their own site. So unlike a studio that's like, Jesus, I gotta spend $30 million to get this crappy teen comedy out there, which totally jams your P&L, they just put it on their site, and they know the analytics of what you watch, and they go, hey, you maybe will like this crappy teen comedy that we also made, and then you'll be driven there, and for free. That's what's really the game changer in terms of Netflix, in terms of the way they do business and the freedom and why they can make so many things and why their swing is so smooth, is because then they get a movie like Mudbound and they just put all their resources into that movie, or Roma this year, to make a huge splash, driving more people to the site because it feels like all their content is going to be of that quality. And so for a movie like Isn't It Romantic, where we sold to Netflix all over the world except for North America, what they did is it freed New Line to not have to market individually in each of those countries, which saves an extraordinary amount of money to the bottom line.
There's this new little thing in journalism that's happening too, and it's not the pretty girl on the cover of the magazine. It's the listicle of what you have to see on Netflix this month. And so journalists are really distinguishing themselves now by saying, I'm the arbiter of what's going on Netflix or Hulu. And it's fascinating because I read those and I take out my little thing and schedule it on my calendar. So it is a huge cost saving because,
They're curating it instead of
yeah,
Netflix.
yeah. So Jordan, this is one of those questions that because you're at the biggest agency in the world, and everybody wants to know, how do they think? How do I make them fall in love with me? What is it that you look for in a client in your department? Because you've got both packaging and digital. And so you handle the regular clients there as well, like Catherine Hardwick. What is it that you find attractive about a client?
I mean, I think it goes back to the first question. I mean, you have to have, a passion focus. I mean, no area, if you're just kind of like listening to what you think we want to hear or somebody else wants to hear, is going to interest anybody. I think, you clearly have to, one thing for me is going to be completely different than another colleague of mine, and so forth and on down the line. So, I mean, it obviously starts with great work, on whether you're director, writer, or producer, or anything on that. In that side, I think, what I'm able to do is I'm able to span across a number of different departments within the company. I'm more so a crossover agent, so I can work with a lot of production company clients, but also, creators and writer directors, and then some people coming out of the YouTube space, and working with new media platforms and studios and so forth. So I'm able to kind of like utilize my brain in that, capacity. And in that, I have obviously a lot of my own passion areas, and I help identify that to a lot of as a young agent in the company, being able to jump onto certain, client company teams and help just let them know there is this new space and this other whole new medium and beast of where you can tell good stories. And because at the end of the day, you're a storyteller. You don't have to go make $100 million budget movie. You can go tell $1 million budget movie if you want to, or go direct a short film or something. I think that, yes, we work at a company that's business focused and, where obviously there's a bottom line and so forth. But, this day and age, I feel like more than ever, what we're allowed to do in light of an area that I won't touch upon because it's very sensitive, but I'll avoid that subject. But on other areas, we can be creative, just like our clients, and that's what I love, that I'm able to do that and go to any other colleague within the company and say, look, I have this baby writer who has only written one spec, but it's one of the best that I've ever read. It doesn't matter what genre, frankly. It could just be something unbelievably amazing, and I'll help shepherd that, through with other colleagues and help them go from there. And that could obviously, lead to a lot more momentum, you know, for their career path. But I mean, it doesn't really start. I mean, you have the most senior agents within the company that represent first-time writers and second-time writers too. I mean, it happens everywhere. And same with producers or directors. They just have, you know, they believe in someone and they believe in their voice, and you don't have to define because of what you think our definition should be. Stick within and really message that as much as you possibly can and build those relationships. And at the end of the day, I mean, it's only going to help you grow and continue to grow if you have a very definitive, this is what I love doing, and this is why no one will tell me what to do. Like, I love hearing that from, you know, other creators and other clients of mine. Like, Catherine is a good example of that. She's obviously been in the business for 40 years, started in production design, and, you know, came across the directing and writing and stuff, but she still has so many different areas. She's going to go direct this series in a week and a half for Katzenberg's new platform, and she just ultimately loves good stories, and that's what she wants to do. Like, that for the rest of time, she will continue to do that, and no one will tell her no. And so we will just help her and be creative with her and helping her tell the best versions and where we can possibly help set this up and create with her. So those are the clients that, you know, will always, I think, resonate throughout, you know, every agency for the most part, that we want to help shepherd and help you in business with too.
But that's so important. If anybody in this room thinks their career can't start until they get an agent, you're not going to have a career. Mm-hmm. So, you know, your career starts when you start creating and you start writing and you start making things and you start figuring out ways to be creative in terms of your distribution model, putting it on YouTube, finding ways to get it to festivals. All those things will ultimately lead an agent to find you. But if you're sitting around going, well, it's a catch-22, I can't have a career until I have an agent, and I don't have an agent until I have a career, it's just crap. Mm-hmm. You got to just go out and create and do it. There's so many ways to get seen and get heard that, you know, this thing that we're not going to talk about, I'll talk about it on my podcast, guys, is just evidence that people are still, no offense, because it's going to turn around, but people are thriving and they're writing and they're doing stuff. And so until they get this all sorted out, people are going to have their careers and they're going to keep doing it. So if you don't have an agent, just do your thing and they'll find you.
Yep.
My first agent when I came out here was William Morris, and they were very siloed. It was like, you're a TV writer. Features are a whole different department. They're on a different floor, so we don't even talk to them. But what I found out was I got every job I ever had while I was with William Morris. So having an agent, as he says, can be important, but you're not sitting there waiting for calls. You're still going out
You
and
mean you
finding.
got every job yourself while at that agency,
Right.
not they got
Yeah.
it for
They
you.
never got me a
Right.
job.
That's exactly right.
3 years, never a job.
Sorry.
Which is it?
It's WB, so it's fine.
Yeah. So we should just beat the shit out of him after this. Just to get our aggressions out on the whole big monolith that sits in Century City. What do you say?
My
But
number on
on
my business card is your office line. It's fine.
on a lighter note, let's go to Adam because
I just want to add one thing
Oh,
to that,
sorry.
which was there's a lot of obsession sometimes about getting the job, whether it's through an agent or not, or how do I meet this person, how do I get that. And I think that sometimes creatives, especially in the early parts of the career, are missing out on the most important thing, which is to concentrate on the quality of what they're doing. And to really drill in deeply into, you know, that first draft of that script, is that really the best draft? Who can you get advice from that is going to help you perfect that and make it really, really sing? Because I think, and a lot of times you get people sending out, oh, this is my pitch, you know, would you like to read the screenplay? Well, how much have you really gone into the research behind those characters? Is it based on true characters? Is it inspired by true characters? Have you gone to people you respect creatively and gotten them to give you feedback on this and to give you notes on this? And if you listen to those notes, or you know, whether it's a director, or producer, or another writer, and I think that the concentration on just doing really, really, really great work is something that people sometimes forget because they just want to get a job, they just want to get something made. And I think that it's sometimes important to dial back, concentrate on making something great, and when it's great, then go out with that and say, this represents me.
Yeah. The goal shouldn't be to get something made. It should be to make something great.
Yep.
I love that.
Amen.
Yes.
Wow, you want to just drop this mic? Here you go.
Bumper sticker.
All right, so on a different note, Adam, you've made a lot of documentaries, and you've made a lot of films that weren't necessarily obvious. And so how do you find and then really shepherd those unobvious, almost the invisible stories that people aren't seeing? Because those become the best documentaries and some of the best films, even if they're considered art house films. So how do you find the invisible stories, and what do you do with them once you find them?
You know, largely, they've come to me. People have found me, and I have a filter that if I'm fascinated by it and I feel I've never seen it before, which means it hasn't really been visible to me before, I feel it hasn't been visible to a lot of people, which means a lot of people could be curious about it if it's well done and when well executed. But I have other screens also, which is, do I believe there is an audience out there for it? Do I believe that we can get the money together for it? And do I like the people involved? Because it's going to be 5 years. And I have to like the people involved. It's like you're getting married and you're at this very intense, intimate relationship. So that's one of my screens. It's, the requirement for visibility of stories is also part of the reasons why we're starting Media U, a new film and media school, to get more visibility for more kinds of stories.
All right, so this is a question I have for Tim, because your film coming up, The Peanut Butter Falcon, has 2 directors. And I have a distribution consultant who says, absent brothers, sisters, or spouses, it will never work with 2 directors. Do your directors fall into that category?
No, they're very unique. They're very yin and yang. So they're really complete opposites, which you'd think then they would conflict constantly, but they don't. Some of the actors really gravitate towards one of them. Some of the actors really gravitate towards the other, which is actually really helpful when it comes to trying to get through certain scenes. And while if you have one director and not getting along with the actor, sometimes you're just going to have a really uphill battle there. I would tend to agree most of the time with that. And there's actually, and while I've only worked once with multiple directors, I've met many director duos, and it's usually one of them that's really the director, and the other one is more of a sidekick. In this experience that we had, they really just work very well together, and they bring things out of each other that I don't know. Just it was a unique situation that I don't think is normal, but it can happen clearly.
Have you ever worked with brothers or 2 directors at once?
Yeah, I just did a little horror movie with the guys who wrote Quiet Place, Beck and Woods, and they co-directed this little movie called Haunt that Eli Roth and I produced together. And the same thing, like they just, can bounce things off each other, and since they're used to writing together, they're used to really being collaborative together.
I want to talk about a part of the filmmaking process that I never hear anybody bring up voluntarily. And it's something that makes me very unpopular around the Writers Guild, definitely around the Directors Guild. But I think if you have to pick a true auteur of a film, a lot of times it comes down to the cinematographer. And if you take Janus away from Spielberg, what are those movies going to feel like, and how much does a cinematographer bring? So at what point do you start talking to the cinematographer as a creative element, and on what level of the creativity do you categorize them?
That's a tough one. There's the ideal, then there's the reality. The cinematographer is meant to be part in sync with the vision of the director. That's the idea. And I think a good cinematographer like Janusz with Steven was that. But I think if you see some of Steven's pictures that were not done with Janusz, they also have his vision in them. So, but I think there's also a synchronicity that happens where the director and cinematographer are feeding off each other, and the cinematographer is feeding to the director, and the director's feeding back to the cinematographer. So it's very much a collaborative process. Would I consider the cinematographer to be an auteur? No, in most cases, no. I think they're part of the creative process. And one of the things, though, that I will make a side comment about is the obsession ever since the late 60s with the director is the sole auteur of a movie. And that this got created out of the French New Wave and all of that. But it really undersells how important the rest of the team is, from the writer to the producers, and I will say the producers, having produced quite a few films, have a tremendous amount to do with the creative direction of a picture. And it's rare that the director can override all others and really have a single vision and be the auteur. There's a few exceptions to that. Now, in the case of a new director, a first time or a young director, the cinematographer is often a key, because they don't know where to put the camera. They don't know what lens to put on. They don't know when the camera should move and when it should not move. And they don't understand the editorial process, and they don't usually have an editor on the set with them. So the cinematographer serves to be a very key in a young director being able to make it work. And I think that it's really important, and sometimes you get a young director who has somebody who shot a video with them and they want to bring them on as a DP. And I'll always say, no, that you need the experience level on that side to help you through this process of doing a feature. So I don't know if that answers your question, but in an oblique way.
Okay, so before we go into questions from the audience, we're going into a new decade. What do you see happening over the next 10 or 11 years in the industry? Todd, you look eager to answer that.
I've been saying the same damn thing for 15 years, and it doesn't seem to ever come true. I always thought that the windows would completely collapse, that the theater owners would be overruled, and that studios would just say, screw you, put it in your theater or don't, and we're going to charge a premium on our own sites, and let the chips fall where they may, let the pricing figure itself out. That clearly has not happened. I gave that speech 20 years ago. And so I think that with now with every studio having its own streaming service, everybody's gunning for the subscription model, obviously. And I think that what that's going to do in the short term is allow the studios to be freed from that P&L a little bit, where they'll take shots knowing that they can put it on their streaming service, which will drive their subscription model and drive eyeballs to their site. And if something breaks out, which is weirdly very much like the Jason Blum model, they'll run it theatrically and then back channel with the streaming service. But everybody went for a subscription rather than like the pay or play model, pay for play model, which that's where I thought it was going to go, which is essentially, a movie like Avengers would come out and you would be able to see it anywhere and you would just be charged accordingly. But that hasn't happened. So I think in the next 10 years what's going to happen is it's going to be a little bit like the gold rush of the DVD days, where they'll take a lot more shots on these middle movies that have kind of gone by the wayside because they need to feed that streaming service, because if you don't, people will just check out and not subscribe, which is why Netflix has to keep feeding that site, because people can just blast you that content so quickly.
Well, they're also about to lose
Can you
most of,
the mic?
and they're also about to lose most of their library. Not most, but a lot.
Well, that's, it's so fascinating, because when Ted first made the announcement that they were going to make 80 movies a year, I had heard like a month or two before the number that they were losing 65 movies a year from the library. So you could see they were ramping up not only the movies they were losing, but then they started this whole TV business, which obviously keeps you on the site because you binge it. So yes, all of the movies are going to be taken off the site, and soon it'll just all be Netflix originals, unless still studios like STX or Paramount will still rent their library out. But for the most part, all of these sites are going to be completely autonomous and have their own content.
Here's the thing, though. The binging didn't start with the streamers. The binging started with the DVDs of season 2
Family
of a
Guy.
show. And so where is it going to go now? It's gone from that. Now it's gone to the streamers. Then what?
Well,
Well-
you don't really need anything else.
I don't know. I'll leap in.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Okay. I think that in 10 years, which is a ridiculous question, and I hope everyone comes back in 10 years and tells me how wrong I am. I think in 10 years, we will have made the full-on shift from the primacy of companies that own content to the primacy of companies that own audiences. Netflix owns an audience, Paramount owns content. I think companies that own content are obsolete. Companies that own audiences are the future. I think there's going to be I think there's massive overspending going on right now, so there's going to be a consolidation coming at some point in the next few years as things crunch down. I think another studio or two will fall. There will be layoffs again, but I think in 10 years, it's all going to be about owning the audience, which sort of paves the way for that streamlined marketing and P&A that Todd just talked about.
Okay, let's open it up to some questions. Now, there are some rules. We are not talking about the scuffle between the agencies and the writers. And if you try to pitch something, I will go 0 to bitch in 6 seconds and stop you. So,
Adam, it's you.
Repeat
Is
the
there a
question.
mic?
Repeat the question.
Catherine, can you repeat the question?
she asked you.
I know, it just got a little bit complicated towards the end, and I
Okay,
missed a few
it
words.
starts with cultural questions, cultural stories that are around that might start as documentary. Can they have crossover to feature film potential as a development to expand the exposure to cultural issues we don't necessarily see, which would go back to that invisible stories?
The answer is yes. Yes. I actually think if there's a great true story, it's a fantastic thing to do to make a documentary. Own those rights, control that product. You can show it to somebody, and then remake it in a scripted form, whether it's a movie, a series, a web series, a whatever. I think it's a very good thing to do. And yeah, I think, look, we're in the nichification of the world now, where you don't need 500 million people. You can have an audience of 50,000 people if you make something at the right scale. So yeah, I think you can.
And everybody's making local language stuff now. Every studio and Netflix also are making local language. So if you are traveling abroad and you find a story that's specific, like Roma or something like that, there are divisions within each of the big studios that handle local language or local stories. So you can also go there.
You, with the camera. Thank-
Piggybacking what you were saying about 10 years in the future, can you guys talk about how filmmaking might change with more VR and interactive storytelling?
I mean, it's happening at Netflix, it's happening at Fox, it's happening at other places. You know, it's just, I think the start, I mean, VR, it's a little bit tricky. They had a moment right now, a lot of the hardware and the cost, everything, was a little bit too high, and they didn't really see that catch on. And people, I think, were creating more, original ideas and content that weren't hitting. And so they have now pivoted in medical and games and other areas that have been a little bit more worth their time and worth the future of looking into. I mean, that area alone is fascinating, but where people in Hollywood and in the monetization and content side, skew now towards interactive content. People want to be, I think that people just want to be encapsulated in a story in any way that they possibly can. So you see Bandersnatch and the way it took off for Netflix, and then once that did, they say, okay, well now we're going to do another 6 of these or so at least to start and kind of test it from there. There's plenty of other platforms. There's a platform called Echo that's out there in interactive storytelling that got a $200 million raise, and so I mean they're going to be creating a ton of so I think it's just an area that hasn't necessarily struck gold just yet, but people are trying to see what that looks like. And so once more of these start to catch on, whether it be original ideas or IP or whatever it may be, then people will start to skew more in that direction. I mean, people are on their phones all day long. So Katzenberg is, obviously you got $1 billion raised in order to try this area that people have tried before in just primarily short form, but also he's talking about implementing interactivity and things like that to see what happens. I mean, because if you go to a movie and you sit there for an hour and a half, and people, obviously, I think the number one thing is, and everybody understands, like, it's an escape for an hour and a half, and it's to put you, kind of outside what's all the things that are happening within the world and into a story for whatever time like that may be. In interactivity, you can do the same thing, but also have the component of getting involved even more so in a story and having the changes of 5 different possibilities of an ending, and not even there, you could have another 15. People find that interesting. People being able to dictate the stories themselves is a little bit more challenging, and I think, as opposed to just watching something for the sake of watching something. So it's going to play itself out, but it is interesting to see what it looks like now, or where that will look like in the next 5 years, as more of these streamers start to, come about, and direct access to watching series and films and content, is at your fingertips more so than ever. So, I don't know.
Yes? Second row, you.
Oh, hi. I'm a producer, and I wanted to know if you guys can give us mistakes that you've seen from producers that we can avoid. And Tim, can you talk about
Can't avoid the mistakes.
Yeah.
It's impossible.
You learn from your mistakes.
Yeah, you're gonna have to make them. It's impossible. Every time I do a movie, and between being an executive for 20 years and being a producer, I've probably worked on over 100 movies easily. Every movie, I think, I've definitely seen everything now. There's nothing new can happen. And then 3 days into shooting, Jeremy Renner breaks both his arms shooting Tag. Or the last movie we're shooting, and 3 weeks in, the actor quits. Just left. So you can't. It was cute. It was a fun day. So you can't, you just can't. There's no way to avoid it. There's no way to avoid making the mistakes. And the way you do your creativity and your business is going to be totally different than any of us. So you have to follow that path. And, the mistakes you make may, vault you into a whole different stratosphere of success that you never knew, because you followed a path that was true to you. If I sit here and tell you, don't do this and don't do that, it's just going to fuck you up.
In the back, oh, sorry.
you mentioned the awards campaign with Netflix? Can you talk more about that? I don't understand it too.
Oh, well, awards campaign for the Oscars and the Golden Globes.
So it's like when you saw 1,000 things for Green Book
Yeah.
right before, and you're like, what the hell is Green Book?
Yeah, and-
That was the studio saying, we're getting an Academy Award for Green Book.
On the aisle, yes, you, fellow, yes.
Yeah, I think the audience, I think the studios are trying. The one that will do it and has done it is Disney, because it is actually a name that has an audience. I don't think the others will, but think about what the other studios are. They're owned by AT&T, Comcast, very large entities that do have audiences, and the studios are really small units within very large superstructures. I think any studio that's attached to a large superstructure that owns an audience has a chance of survival, but if they don't, it's going to all shift. That's my probably incorrect prognostication.
On the end, it'll, yes.
Thank you. I'm just going to build on that question for a second about the building of the awards campaign. So how do you stipulate something like that? Do you take a take a cut in the actual, number that you're getting for the film?
You mean, do we take a reduced upfront?
Yeah, I mean, how do you negotiate something like that without somebody just walking
Well,
in and saying, forget it,
they all could have said no, but we just went in there strong and bullish, and we just come out of a screening at Sundance to like a 10-minute standing ovation and just ridiculous reviews, and we were like, this is what we want. So we were kind of well positioned to be able to dictate that, and we had already had those conversations with other buyers. So we just dug our heels in and said, this is what we want. And fortunately, they said yes, and they definitely could have said no.
And it's time to say goodbye. I'm so sorry because there's so many people who have questions, but I'd appreciate it if you say thank you to our panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. I gotta go.